Hi, everyone. We are going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Erin Battle. I'm the Associate Director of the William & Mary Washington Center, and we're really excited to bring you our program tonight centering around the state of teaching in DC. And so this is part of our 20th anniversary. As many of you know, the Washington Center is celebrating our 20-year anniversary this year in 2021 with a whole host of videos and events monthly. If you'd like to take a look at what our past events have been or what we have planned for the rest of the year, you can visit us on our website. It's just wm.edu/dc/20 years. And we'll go ahead and put that in the chat so that you can have access to that if you'd like. One video that I'd like to just highlight for you is one that actually just came out today. It is our first two DC semester program professors, Chris Nemechek from the government department and Ann Rasmussen from the music department, talking about what those first couple semesters were like and how it was to teach in DC for the first time through William & Mary. So for tonight's program, I'm really honored to be joined by just a few of our educators and partners that have really made our study in DC opportunities amazing and fruitful for our students. Without these folks, we really wouldn't be able to give students the rewarding opportunities that come from doing a study in DC opportunity academically. And we're super excited to be able to highlight that for all of you. We'll have kind of a discussion where I'll ask a few questions of our folks here, and then if you all have questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to use the Q&A feature, and I will do my best to get to as many as we can at the end of the program. And so without further ado, we'll get started with our panelists. We'll have them introduce themselves, and as part of their introductions, they'll also tell you a little bit about a specific memory that they have or a specific way that they've been able to take advantage of the unique teaching opportunities in the Washington Center. And so we will start with Ann.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And Erin, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of the 20th anniversary of WM in DC. My name is Ann Rasmussen. I'm a professor in the Department of Music. I'm also affiliated with the program in Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. And I'm an ethnomusicologist. And actually my research is in the United States, but also in Indonesia and the Arab world. And I really look at the arts and the way it reflects and projects people's cultures, societies, and so forth. So I had been taking students up to DC for the day-long field trip as part of my courses, where we would visit National Endowment for the Arts and Smithsonian Folkways recordings and the Archive of Folk Culture at the Library of Congress, maybe take in a concert and so forth. And so when the DC program started, I think I, sat down and put together a proposal in an hour. It just seemed like such a natural way to teach. So I've been lucky to be the semester professor 2 different times. In 2007, I was the second full semester professor, and then again in spring of 2019. And the theme of my semesters has been Washington and the arts. And one of the terrific things about teaching in DC is that students come from a variety of majors. They pursued internships in everywhere from the Woolly Mammoth Theater to a variety of Smithsonian museums to I had someone who was a speechwriter in the Trump White House, and National Geographic, NPR, I mean, just many, many internships. And the students themselves brought so much to the playbook that I had written for them in terms of the courses that we designed. So that, to me, was what just enriched the whole experience so much. We met people everywhere from the Kennedy Center, which you see behind me, to the Museum of African American History and Culture, to the Alexandria Architecture Center, to the John Philip Sousa archives at the U.S. Marine Band. And many of these visits were a function of the incredible networking that the DC office does with our alumni. So it wasn't like I had to think up all of these ideas, but the DC staff, Roxanne and Aaron and Reese, were all just kind of feeding me ideas about what we could do. In terms of one memory, one of the things that people often did, the specialists that came to talk to us, and then on our Friday seminar in the city, when we would go to different institutions and spend the whole day, or 4 or 5 hours looking at the insides and the underbelly of like the Library of Congress and exciting places like that. People would often ask, where do you get your music? And we'd go around the room and students would say, oh, Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube and whatever. And I would say things like, I go to concerts, I buy CDs from musicians that I like, I listen to the radio. I mean, totally old school kind of stuff. And one of our interns who was at the Smithsonian, and we visited the Smithsonian, they followed the production of a CD of a group of young women called Lula Wiles. And their CD was produced by the Smithsonian. And all of a sudden, we realized that our class night was on a night when they were having a CD release party. And so we went down to the wharf, we went to a bar, and we went to the CD release party, and we hung around and we danced and we listened to live musicians, young people their age who were coming up, who were relying on human connection, right? Not on Spotify and Google and YouTube, but actually people showing up. And it kind of completely transformed our seminar, our semester-long seminar, in the ways that people could think about the creative artist, but also arts policy, arts patronage, financing, showing up, community, production. And people just made reference back to that event, throughout the whole semester. So that's the one memory that pops into my mind of many, many kind of, turning points in my experiences in DC.
Well, Erin, thank you so much for including me on the panel. I wanted to start by saying congratulations to the Washington Center on celebrating 20 years of a connection in the city to be our support network in Washington, D.C. And that doesn't happen without highly effective leadership. So congratulations to you, Erin, to you, Roxanne, to the advisory board, many of whom are listening tonight, and to many others who've come before. My name is Drew Stelljes, and I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Student Engagement and Leadership. And for the last 11 years, I've had the honor of serving as the professor for the DC Summer Institute for Leadership and Community Engagement. And I also teach a winter seminar on urban education. Over the years in the Summer Institute, the lifetime speech has become a real pillar of the experience. And in fact, as we select new fellows each year, many of them have heard about the lifetime speech as a component of the May class. The speech is maybe what you would expect. We give students free range with regard to creativity to deliver a speech that kind of looks back on their life, imagines them at an older age, and looks back on the more important things in their life. And by allowing students creativity to come up with something that really speaks to them, it gives them a real sense of reflecting on the meaning and the purpose of what will become their professional life. We have had people write songs. We've had people imagine themselves giving a retirement speech to everyone in their school as serving as the principal. But as a way to conclude and then hand the microphone off to the next person, I want to read you just a snippet of one of these speeches. And it won't take long, but I think it's powerful enough to sort of demonstrate and illustrate the impact of this. And it's called "I Am Tired." I am tired. I know people just tell me to get a good night rest and I'll get over the hump, but that's not it. I'm talking about the tired where you feel the weight of the world on your chest, hear the words of your parents at night affirming you're great and smart and capable, see the stories of your ancestors so vividly in your mind as you doze off to sleep, so it gives you no other choice but to go forward, because I can't go back. I'm only a child. I'm a first-generation college student. I can't be tired. I'm a Black woman, so I can't afford to appear lazy. I'm a Black woman, so I can't afford to appear angry. I'm a Black woman, so I can't afford to appear passionate, to appear possessive, to be loud, to be direct, to be spontaneous. But I'm tired. And she goes on to conclude that I do have the right. I have the right to be tired. I have the right to rest. I have the right to be authentic, to be who I am and what I believe, but I'm tired. And I think in that, it demonstrates so much of the possibility of what our students can share with us and with one another and building a sense of community. It's so life-giving, as we all would all speak to. It's so life-giving to be able to teach and learn through the Washington Center.
Thanks, Drew. I really enjoyed that. I really appreciated that. It's beautiful. And thank you to Erin and the Washington Center. I'll add to that. This is a wonderful event, and I'm really happy to be part of it, to be part of this event, and also to be a part of the whole experience of William and Mary in Washington. It's an amazing place with amazing energy. I have, with my colleague Sarah Menifee, taught there 3 times. I'm a faculty member in the Health Sciences Department, and I teach and do research in public health and global health. So to have the opportunity to take students to DC to explore those topics and all the nuance of that city, you know, compared in contrast to sort of the small little dome we live under here in Williamsburg, is just such a remarkable opportunity. I've taught, let's see, 2 spring break courses and a winter seminar, much shorter periods of time than, say, if you're there all semester. So we hit the ground and go pretty hard and pretty fast. It's really difficult for me to just pick one experience, but our course focuses on health equity, on the social determinants of health. And all of the people in health, in healthcare, in all of the fields that contribute to creating environments, creating a world where people have the opportunity to be healthy, to flourish, to be resilient, or not so much. So really, the students get an opportunity through the DC experience to see that in all of its nuance. To, on the same day, for example, be at a food pantry that does integrated services for the most, you know, the low income, for the homeless in DC. And then that afternoon to be at the Capitol talking to Senator Kane's health aide about health policy in the seat of power of the US. So just amazing opportunities for our students. It's hard for me to pick one thing, but I'll single out a day we had at the Capitol. You know, we had talked in class certainly about vaccines. This was pre-COVID, but we thought about these things before COVID. And, you know, we took them to the Capitol, and there happened to be a Senate hearing that day about some relatively mundane facet of vaccine policy at the time. And we thought, well, you know, the students will be able to see how this works, even if it's a little dull. And we arrived there and were greeted by security guards who were standing outside the door with some of those plastic handcuffs that they use, and this huge mass of people crowding into this hearing room to protest the discussion of vaccines. You know, a huge group of anti-vaccination parents and their children had arrived there in mass, and anytime a physician would try to speak, these people would scream over them and yell really graphic things, wearing t-shirts with really graphic pictures and statements. The students themselves were the target of a little bit of hostility, I will say, because it was clear that they were taking a class in public health. And while that experience, you know, it took a lot of unpacking, but you know, I could never duplicate that in the classroom. I can lecture until I'm blue in the face trying to explain to students that there are people in the world who have issues with vaccines and who are afraid of them and think they're conspiracies, et cetera, et cetera. But I could never have given them that experience of being in a room full of screaming adults, yelling about their freedom and the conspiracy that vaccines are. So, that really stands out in my mind as a really transformative moment for those students. And there's so many of those that we've had at the DC Center, but I've done more than 2 minutes, so happy to hand off. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire McKinney. I am joint appointed in the government department and in the Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies program at William & Mary. And I've been afforded the really wonderful opportunity to work with the DC Center over the past 3 summers, working in the summer session hybrid program. So I was there I'm a relative newcomer to the DC Center, but I was there at the beginning of this particular program, which is a combination of 4 weeks of online work and then 1 week of in-person DC activity. And the course I've taught is called From Protest to Policy, Gender and Political Process, where we are really interested in thinking about all the ways gender and sexuality enters into the world of activism and interest groups, into legislative processes and elections, and then finally into the actual execution of policymaking and the courts. So it's a really kind of exciting way to think about how gender makes a difference politically. And so because of the hybrid nature of the program, it's really designed to accommodate folks who are spending their summers doing other things beyond just the course. And so the real enriching thing for me is being able to bring students in contact with practitioners. And so, I've had some really wonderful speakers, but one of which that really kind of stands out in my mind is a young woman who was a William & Mary alumni who had spent a year getting a master's in Ireland, and during her time there had become really engaged in activism around the referendum to change the constitution in Ireland in order to stop the criminalization of abortion. So this is a really obviously very controversial topic, but what she was able to bring was a real sense of what it means to really fully involve yourself in the politics of a place that may not be kind of your home environment, but also how enriching it is to begin to have those conversations that are really difficult to have, right? And I think what students saw in engaging with her was both the capacity to imagine what their lives after William & Mary could really open up to, but also just the variety of ways that dedication can really kind of come to fruition. So she was somebody who was able to celebrate the referendum results that summer. And so getting to see both her reflection, but also students getting to engage with somebody who put their priorities kind of on the line, really kind of brought home how much politics are just part of our ordinary lives.
Thanks, Claire. Good evening, everyone. I'm Adam Barger. I bring you greetings from the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation at William & Mary. We're close partners with the Washington Center. I'm an educationalist at William & Mary, and I serve as the Associate Director for Academic Innovation, and we oversee a lot of the digital teaching and learning initiatives at William & Mary, which is pretty fun to be involved in during a global pandemic. So it's a very small silver lining for the mess that we're in right now. And I'm so happy to be here tonight with these panelists and to celebrate this milestone. And one of the things in digital teaching and learning that has happened over the last several years is people are starting to understand that it can be a lot more than just online. And so a little bit later, we can talk about that, from my perspective and what we've done at the DC Center. But one of my earliest memories was not long after I started at William & Mary. One of my earliest memories with the center was not long after I started. I took an invitation to join DC for a day, and they bussed us up there for a staff day. And we got to see their patio and things like that. And we all took turns kind of meeting with the staff. And so when it came to my turn, I said, wow, this is an incredible place. It's so cool to be here. Have you ever thought about doing more stuff online? And the idea of loving the location of DC while also suggesting doing more e-learning and more online at first might have seemed a little jarring, but that was the start of a really great partnership that extends to today and has helped expand programming and given a lot more people access to DC as a learning resource and as a connector of people. And so it's been wonderful to see that, and I'm excited to talk more about that tonight. So thanks so much, Aaron, for having me.
Of course. Thank you all so much. So I'll just jump right into the questions that we have prepared. And like I said, if any of you in the audience have questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A box. But to start out, Anne and Claire, I'll shoot this question to both of you. You touched on it actually a little bit in your intros. Can you talk a little bit more about what you see as the value of an experiential learning type of experience like DC, especially as students think about not just their time at William & Mary, but what they hope to do after William & Mary? Maybe Claire, you start, and then Anne, you go second.
Yeah, so thank you. I think that this is a really great question. And so I'll be able to talk about this from maybe the kind of lower intensity side, because we are dealing with a hybrid program in the summer session. But the lower intensity doesn't mean that you're, not getting a full range of experiences. And so I think the two things I would want to highlight about the experiential learning embedded in the DC program is first, the networking opportunity. So one of the things and one of the hallmarks of the time in DC is an evening event where William & Mary alumni are invited to kind of a, cocktail hour with the students. And so this is both a very nerve-wracking experience I've seen for some students, which is they don't quite know what kind of networking is, but it's actually one that allows them to ease into this because they already have that William & Mary connection. And so they get to see the broad range of how folks have taken their William & Mary education and entered into the DC world. So there are folks who have served as legislative assistants. There are people who work for think tanks. There are folks who work for digital advertising for both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. There are folks who are part of NGOs that are centered in DC. And so just seeing them have their worlds open by kind of having low-key conversations about who their favorite professors were at William & Mary and how it is that they got this job. It's just really exciting to see that opportunity. Embedded in the course, I think one of the things that you get from experiential learning that you don't necessarily get in a traditional classroom is a real sense of the divergence between the academic study of phenomenon and the lived experience of that phenomenon. So they can read myriad pieces on the policymaking process, but having somebody come to the classroom and say, actually, I was just on the phone with so-and-so, and that's how I was able to get this bumped up, right? That they get to see how the interpersonal connections and the way things actually are in the world don't necessarily follow the scripts that they've been taught in the classroom. And so that kind of expansion of understanding the world is really, really thrilling to see.
Thanks, Claire. Your comment about the younger alumni that you invited back reminded me of a few of the alum that I discovered who actually reached out to me and said, oh, Professor Rasmussen, you're teaching the DC semester. Do you know that I'm up here now and I'm the education and outreach coordinator for the National Symphony? All of a sudden, ding, ding. Okay, and so we, as we had family weekend, and we went to an event there, but she also came and talked to our class and with a couple of other students who were just 5 years out. And I was so proud of them to just be able to represent how it was that they were living and working in the city, and also trying to, navigate an interesting life, a cultural life, a social life, and that, in addition to members of the Board of Visitors who used to show up to, who routinely show up to our events. Or, for example, the very well-off, patron of the arts who allowed us, $75 tickets to go to Chanticleer one night, right? So the whole range of the alumni network and getting that all in the mix. One of the things that we really did the last time was to think about DC as as kind of a cultural representation of the United States, one of the most diverse communities in the United States, a place that is renowned for its reputation as a chocolate city. What does that mean, right? What does that mean in terms of the peoples and the arts and the neighborhoods that have been there? So, for example, going to U Street to understand the role of the 930 Club as one of the hippest, best acoustically place to play a rock and roll show, but also their role in taking over a couple of other theaters. For example, the Lincoln Theater, which really was part of Black Broadway on U Street, and the reputation of the Duke Ellington and the Ella Fitzgerald that have played there. As well as thinking about things like go-go, Washington's signature music. So I had one student who walked by the corner that was where those sounds were being gentrified away. And this was a controversy that was ongoing. Another thing that was really interesting about spring 2019 is that we arrived in the shutdown. The government was shut down. So I had to scramble for our first 4 weeks that I had all beautiful, it's like, okay, I got the first 4 weeks figured out, then I'll figure out the rest. Well, hello, I had to figure out the first 4 weeks too. So we were watching and feeling and living the implications of government shutdown, not only on our academic program, but the students in the organizations where they were working. And the various interests and expertise that they brought in, and the way that they were able to weave into our, into the playbook that I had organized, their own knowledge of people and events and things that were coming up. I'll mention one thing that was really terrific in terms of the experience. Getting back to the question, the experiential learning model. I really like to apply the things that I teach. So, for example, in teaching something like ethnography, right? What is the ethnography of performance? Well, yes, you can go and see the fife and drum or, whatever in Williamsburg, but, you're in DC and you don't have to have a car, and you can get anywhere for anything practically. And that just brings so much richness into the way students take my suggestions of assignments and run with them. And one of the things that we did as a group that's very difficult to do in Williamsburg. One of the things that we did as a group was, because it was the year of women at William and Mary, and we were celebrating 100 years of women at William and Mary, they put on a symposium called Women in the Arts. And over the semester, we had met women that really made an impression. The development director at the Kennedy Center, one of the curators at Smithsonian Folkways. We went to the music department at NPR, which, by the way, is run by a William and Mary alum, and had one of these, powerful young women who are writing the script for NPR music. We had somebody from the State Department and somebody from the head of music at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And the students approached these women who had been part of our semester, decided everything from, the playlist to organizing entertainment on the balcony and the catering and the Q&A and the introductions and the web publicity. And we got a little money from, Professor Jane Barnard, who was running the William and Mary Year of Women. And it was a moment of extraordinary pride. And again, this scintillating connection between the students and the professors and the alumni and community members who all showed up for this event. And I really have to thank Roxanne Adler-Hickey for thinking about event planning in ways that were both logistically important, but also kind of academically interesting. And it was a moment of great pride and significance, and just a whole lot of fun too.
Thank you both. And yeah, and that event was amazing, absolutely amazing. Definitely the highlight of student events that we've had students coordinate. So kudos to them in that semester. So thinking about the teaching part of the DC experience, how, for those of you that have taught a few times, so we'll go to Drew and Alison on this one, how has teaching, and I think this actually popped up in the Q&A, how has teaching in DC changed for you from the first time that you taught and your opportunity through subsequent years? What have you learned? What have you implemented that's been different in the more recent iterations of your courses?
Yeah, thanks, Erin. So this will be the 11th or 12th year I've had the opportunity to teach the Summer Institute. And in some ways, we've changed a number of things, and in some ways, certain things have remained the same. And I wanted to address both of those with you. Like any of us, we want to do better for our students each and every year, and so we spend considerable time reflecting after the program ends on how to do better for our students. But I think one of the things that's remained the same is that the Washington Center has given us an opportunity to introduce inquiry-based learning and teaching into the way in which what we offer our students. And having asked students regularly, what do they really see as inquiry-based learning and teaching? It really gives them a chance to investigate complex leadership problems and ask complex questions. So what we do is we give students the chance to do just that. They ask hard questions, they collect data, they use evidence-based reasoning and qualitative inquiry to start to develop conclusions based on a set of common and uncommon responses from the site visits from our speakers. And it gives me a chance to build a community of learners by moving students away from general curiosity about a topic and more into critical thinking about the nuances of the topic. So for example, it's one thing for a student to be generally curious about a site visit because they may or may not see themselves in that profession. But it's more important for them to be able to see themselves as budding qualitative researchers collecting data and then analyzing it and demonstrating critical thinking and analysis to me, as they progress through the class. And that's exactly how we've done it. Is we develop together a set of common questions that we'll ask at each and every site visit. And then we also provide structure for meeting with the experts and touring the sites. It gives us, we see it as a rich research environment, and not to disparage a field trip, but it gives each and every site visit a gravity to it and a necessity to collect data and analyze. And we always begin with students focusing on the why rather than the what in making sense of their interactions and responses. And by that I mean is we don't want them to necessarily just see what exists, but we want to know why. We want to know why people are making the decisions they're making. We want to know why the ways in which leadership is happening in these spaces. Students are provided with biography and case studies, history of the organization, and they're expected to collect evidence for their analysis. They're expected to do additional research on organizational structure and communication analysis and the norms of the organization. A lot of times students hear from me say that we are focusing on this from a position of neutrality, that we're engaging in analysis of individuals and systems, and their actions and their structures. And there is no place here for them to make conclusions based on bias stereotype. There is no place there for them to place judgment on an expert's response or an expert's decision-making. Who are we to know how the intricacies of an organization with one visit? What we can do, though, is to ask the questions and learn how to be budding qualitative researchers. That being said, I would say there's three main things that I can see we've changed over the years. That's the commonality. The changes are that we added a 1-credit course in order to provide foundations for the summer classes so that we were well prepared going into the May classes. Our invited speakers have emerged more as co-educators. I work with them closely prior to us going to visit with them or them coming to visit with us so that they know what the learning goals of the course are. And then they can sort of help me to educate the students. And then finally, I think we've learned about the pace of the summer internship program and how to be really effective co-partners with our internship site supervisors and to understand the ebb and flow, the ups and downs of the natural interval or the cycle of a 10-week internship program.
And Alison, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I couldn't get unmuted there for a minute. Well, thanks, Drew. And way back at the beginning, before I taught in DC for the first time, Drew sat down with me at Panera, I don't know if he remembers this, to give me advice and words of wisdom. And those words of wisdom were very, very helpful. I still have the notes on like a napkin or something. But yeah, so I'm relatively young to the DC Center compared to a lot of you, in that, you know, I've been 3 times, and, you know, all of our courses have been in these very compact delivery modes. So over the week of spring break or like 10 days of winter break. So it's been sort of fast and furious. And I'd say, you know, we have undergone flux over those 3 years, and that's definitely continuing, in part because public health is new, relatively new to William and Mary, and relatively new to the Washington Center. And there's such a wealth of possibility of things we could do. And so it's sort of like, you know, being in a toy store for us. There are so many wonderful alums who have supported us and who have come and spoken or invited us to out to see where they work, the things that they do. And so really we've been sort of evolving as we go along and continue to. I would say one of the main adjustments that we've made just over these first three visits is that we now spend a whole lot less time in the conference room at the DC Center than we did at the beginning, you know, because it was so clear that, you know, that first class that we did, we just had 2 or 3 site visits, but when we came back to Williamsburg, you know, everything had mattered. Everything was wonderful, but those were the things that the students talked about again and again and again, because I think they really experienced what I've heard referred to as visceral learning, you know, where it's not just information entering your brain, it's something you feel in your body, you know, you're experiencing it in this completely sensory way because you're there and you're a part of it. And so we've really tried now to maximize the amount that we can provide that sort of experience, that, you know, instead of listening to me talk or Sarah talk or anyone else talk, that to some degree we're out and we're seeing it and we're living it. Because so much about health equity and the social determinants, of course, is about the conditions and contexts in which people are existing, in which people are living and experiencing the world. And so to really get that at a visceral level, the students need to experience that as well. And they need to feel the contrasts of going from a neighborhood that's very low income and low resource, and all of the ways that's connecting up to make those people vulnerable. And then the next day to step into a setting of some of the most, you know, wealthy and powerful people on the globe making decisions that affect everybody. and seeing how what happens in both of those spaces matters. And in addition, how they can be involved in both of those spaces. That's the other piece. I feel like more and more in our class, we proceed down two tracks. We're wanting them to see, to understand, to feel this idea of health equity, and why our nation is one of the most unequal among wealthy countries when it comes to health, especially if you cut it along axes of race and ethnicity, for example. But we also want them to be able to envision what they could do or what they could be. Since so many of them, they come into our classes at William and Mary and to the DC Center just with this sort of drive and this passion for this idea of health and social justice, for example, but they're not really sure what that means or what they could do with that. So from the very beginning, whether we're in the center or we're out in communities, just to be talking to people who are not only teaching them about health equity and how that works in the world, but also providing living models of how you can be someone who works on that problem, who makes that passion into a career path. And especially the fact that a lot of those folks are William and Mary alums is even more compelling for them, because they can see, oh my goodness, this person was exactly where I am 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And now look at this amazing thing they're doing. I didn't even know this was a thing, but it's a thing. And so, we more and more sort of think of the course progressing along both of those tracks, both teaching the learning objectives, but also trying to help the students see possibilities for their own futures. And that's just a wonderful, wonderful gift.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question I have also came in the chat, but is one that we had previously talked about among our panel, and I'll direct it to Adam. What do you see as the trends in educational technology, and how do you see William and Mary and maybe the Washington Center in particular implementing those trends?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's top of mind for a lot of folks right now. I'll say I think this Zoom thing is here to stay, whether we like it or not. But it's definitely bigger than that too. I think there's two very broad trends that have been happening over the last several years and picked up some speed over the last year. And they're related to one another. And the first one really is about just generally more connectivity to the internet and the information that's there. More connectivity, more access. In the class I'm teaching this semester, we were looking at some recent polling from Pew, and I think it's like 9 out of 10 American adults are on the internet in some way, shape, or form. And that's going up every year. And so this idea of just a huge amount of connectivity means that we have access to information on a scale that is just unbelievable. I mean, just about anything I want to learn, I can learn from the phone in my pocket, in Wikipedia. And so what that means is we have lots and lots of options for online learning. Just about every university, and certainly all elite universities, are online in some way, shape, or form, whether it's a lot of classes or programs or just a couple of things. And so that's the second trend, is that there are a huge amount of options for students to learn online. And so at William and Mary, and specifically the Washington Center, we're in a context where it's no longer we're going to do things brick and mortar and maybe have this other wing of online. We have to look at it holistically. It's not William and Mary in person and William and Mary online, it's William and Mary. And so how do we get to work in that space in a way that's meaningful and bring the characteristics of William and Mary learning to an online or hybrid environment? And so I'm fond of saying that education in the digital age is no longer about information, it's about experience. And the stories that Claire and Ann and Alison and Drew have already shared just prove that, with the Washington Center. If we can connect the information, the opportunities of online to the experience that only William and Mary can provide, that's where you're going to find some real special learning. And a great example of this is in some of the programs, I think Claire mentioned the hybrid program. And the idea there is flexibility, of course, but it's also a way to leverage the expanding space and place of learners. So if Claire has a learner in California and a learner in China and a learner in Williamsburg, that's not a problem that she has to contend with. That is an asset that she gets to use. We can leverage the space and place of learners to enrich the learning environment. Hey, tell me how what's happening in this area in China. Tell me what California is doing about this policy. And so we can enrich the experience of learning by leveraging the space and place of learners that has expanded over time. And by doing that, we are expanding the space and place of the Washington Center. And so I think the center is well on their way to kind of embracing this. And I think I see more of this coming as online continues to grow and as more students continue to be interested. And the other interesting thing about this is learners are most often not staying in one place. Even when they're in California or China, they're mobile. And so another big trend that's coming is, well, it's already in place really, is how do you make these online learning experiences more mobile, more personal, so they can hit the road and do this. And that doesn't have to be a negative thing either. Sometimes we think, hey, we don't want our students sitting on a beach, taking their class information and doing their discussion boards. But maybe we do. Maybe we do want the aspects of adventure and movement and being mobile. And so I think we're uniquely positioned to capitalize on these trends, Aaron. And I think that question is something that we can come back to every year and find new things to do.
Thanks, Adam. And yeah, I think one of the great things that comes along with working in the Washington Center on the academic side is maybe it's because of the physical distance, maybe it's because we're a little bit insular in the way that our academics function, but we're able to do a lot of experimentation from year to year. And as you pointed out at the top, one of those kind of things that has stuck has been that hybrid summer session class that was really unique at the time and has kind of taken off from there. And so we're excited to continue to kind of try different new things out and see if they work, not just for us, but for William & Mary on the whole, and see if we can be successful in our small community doing things that would benefit the larger William & Mary community. So yeah, thinking more about how we design courses in DC. So we've talked a little bit about, the benefits to students. How do you all best take advantage of what DC has to offer, the uniqueness that is Washington, DC? So Claire, if you want to talk a little bit about how you take advantage of that in your kind of shorter hybrid opportunity, and then Drew, if you want to talk about that in some of the longer DCSI type of communities or type of opportunities, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And actually, I feel like this is a really perfect bridge question with what Adam was just describing, because I'll tell you, Adam was the most brilliant resource for me in my first foray in teaching anything online. And so the idea of the hybrid experience of how do I design a course for students where part of the experience is going to give them the capacity to learn in whatever location they're in, and then we're going to converge together in DC. That, it was a really exciting opportunity. And so some of the things Adam really taught me how to do was how to design an online course when that physical presence wasn't there to help me connect to students, but then I can leverage that later on. And so some of those opportunities were doing things like recording a kind of casual weekly memo going over some of the things that I saw and that I was excited about, discussion board conversations or particular things in assignments or where I saw questions, right? And so giving them the opportunity to feel like they got to know me a little bit more as an instructor when we couldn't be in the same place together. But when we do have that opportunity to be in DC, my first thought whenever I was designing this was it would be great to have all of these very high-powered, very influential folks come to the class. And then I came to see that the students valued having recent William & Mary alum, sometimes even more than having those kind of high-powered professionals, because for them, what DC gave them the opportunity to do was imagine where they were heading. And so thinking about, the richness of William & Mary in DC, the number of alum that we have who are so excited and thrilled to be part of the experience with our students, that really gave a whole new vision of what a place could come to mean based on those kind of interpersonal connections. And so just the sheer opportunity to bring together folks who would never meet otherwise, and DC is that commonality, that common point, and the experiences that one can have there, it's just kind of truly revelatory about what's possible in these spaces.
I would just add a little bit to what Claire said, is that we both respond to and hopefully push leadership within our course. So what is happening in Washington, D.C. is somewhat emblematic of what's happening in different places around the country and in communities. And so we are learning from what's happening, but then we go in and investigate and push on systems and ask questions. Really think we're at the precipice of a real revolution in the way in which we are committed to personal health and individual well-being. I think that's a commonality that people across communities from different walks of life who have experienced things very differently can all agree upon, is that an individual's health and well-being is important. I think the pandemic has given us a chance to focus on building community in a virtual world, which was never something we really imagined, even though the technology was there. And people like Adam and others who are technologists, educational technologists, were pushing us in that direction. We've refocused our vision for how do you use the outdoors for learning and teaching and discovery. And the Washington Center has essentially been doing that. It's been fertile ground for this kind of work for 20 years. The other thing is, I think we're on the brink of awakening on how we cultivate a deeper sense of citizenship, and how we can talk about shared values and norms. And we need that. We know we need that. And Washington, D.C. sort of awakens us to that in a really palpable way. You can't be in D.C. without feeling the energy of both community, of people coming together, and also the divides that are so pervasive in our country and our society. So I think we're about to witness a real revolution and an acceleration in the way in which we consider things like inclusion and celebration of our underrepresented populations, in having voice, in discourse, and in leadership. And classes like this out of the Washington Center are how that happens, because it gives us a chance to engage with and in community in a really substantial way. So I think that's where, as professors, it's our responsibility to listen to and learn from our students, listen to and learn from our communities, to think about, in my case, how leadership can be a case study in how to work and solve problems across political, social, cultural divide.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, just to kind of follow up on something that you mentioned, Drew, just now, the idea of community being a really big driving factor in student success, really, within the programs that we run in particular. That's something that our staff on the staff side of things has also really wanted to implement a little bit more. And so this past year, for the first time, our fall semester and spring semester students during their orientation had a moment where they focused on citizenship and what that means to them, and really engaging within their community. And so they had about half an hour to an hour of their orientation where they got to research different issues that were in the fall on ballots, and in the spring had to do with either something happening in DC or in their local jurisdiction, wherever they're from, and then having a really robust discussion during orientation on that. And in addition to that, we try our best to make sure that students are getting out and about in the city and kind of getting the community engagement, community service part of the experience so they feel very connected to the places that they're living. So Drew, your classes have gone to DC Central Kitchens many times over and done a service there. And your class in 2019 went to N Street Village and got to hang out with those women and did some music therapy with the women that live in those shelters. And so we're trying to do as much of that as we can, both on the academic and the staff side. And I think that the students are really feeling wonderfully connected with their community. And, you know, I think it's paying dividends for sure. One of the other things that you touched on, Drew, that I kind of want to throw to Alison first is the idea of mental health and well-being being at the forefront of all of our minds as higher education professionals. I think that not just at William & Mary, but across universities, that's been something that has come to the forefront of everyone's minds. And at a place like William & Mary that is known for their academic rigor, we put students that really enjoy that kind of experience in what could rigorous kind of environment in DC. You know, classes are happening faster, classes are happening in a more compact way. How do we as professionals, how do you as professors help students balance the well-being part of their whole selves with the academic part, and specifically the William & Mary academics that come along with doing one of our classes?
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I'm really happy to speak to that. But while it's on my mind, I just wanted to go back just one second to respond to something that Drew said, and to respond a bit to Adam. That one of the things I also value about this is to the ways in which we can use technology and the communities that we build in DC to sort of break down the barriers between Williamsburg and DC. You know, I love the fact that Zoom isn't going away. You know, I was big into Skype even, you know, but before the pandemic, and IT got to know me well because I always had to bring the little eyeball camera into my classroom because I wanted to Skype people in. And I just love it that, you know, the alums, the connections we've made through the DC Center, I'm now able to invite some of those folks into my classes in Williamsburg to sort of share that connection with my students back in Williamsburg in an even greater way. And so I just wanted to bring that in, that for me, you know, that permeability has been so valuable for me even when I'm back in Williamsburg. But in terms of mental and physical health issues, yes. And, you know, we've been fortunate in that we've found ways of explicitly integrating some of that into our classes in DC. Couple of examples. The first year we did the class, it was over spring break. So students were, you know, leaving campus in Williamsburg, heading to DC, doing this intense class over their spring break, and then heading back to Williamsburg to go back to their regular classes. So we were acutely aware of what this was asking of them mentally and physically, and you know, the drain on their energy, on their psyches, on everything, not to mention our own. So as part of our week, you know, we scheduled in some of these, you might think of them as wellness modalities that we could approach both from a health equity perspective, but also from a personal wellness perspective. We took them forest bathing. You know, it's a Japanese nature therapy where essentially you sort of commune with the forest and with the trees. And we had a wonderful woman who facilitated that for us, who also had her master's of public health. So she could do this for us. And it was a lovely, calming thing, very restorative, but also make those connections with how is this working in the body to increase wellness, how, I already got my 1 minute warning. And also, how does this work across equity sectors? You know, who has access to this sort of wellness modality and who doesn't? We brought in a speaker to talk about meditation and do some sitting meditation actually in the DC Center. And again, talk about how does this work in the body? How could this be implemented across the spectrum of, you know, race, class, and wealth to try to improve health outcomes in the general population. So yeah, those are issues that are, I could talk about this forever, of course, constantly on our mind, both specifically and generally, because, you know, the students in general at William & Mary, they're too stressed out. And I don't want them to take that model of how some of them exist in William and Mary out into the larger world and continue on that way in their professional lives. So we're trying to show them some tools and some alternatives.
Yeah, yeah, and Anne, kind of same question to you. You teaching the semester program, students obviously are taking class with you in the evenings during their programs that they did, but they're also doing a full-time internship, and then they're having to go home and do schoolwork, and then they're also trying to get out and about and really live their lives in DC. So how do you balance all of that with the idea that we really do want to make sure that students are emphasizing taking care of themselves?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and listening to my colleagues just reminds me of all the different little instances and personalities and social connections and disconnections that were made. One of the things that's great about William and Mary in DC is being away from campus. The noise of campus, I'm taking 5 classes and I'm in 5 clubs, and I have, and I'm doing all of these extra things that goes away. And so there's a kind of an emotional space, I think, that opens up. And at the same time, there's a requirement for that group of people, just like on a study abroad, and I've done study abroad in Oman, in the Arabian Gulf, 3 times, that group has to become a family. They have to have each other's back. They have to really care about each other, and they know they do. A couple of things are stressful for everybody. Students have a wide variety of internship experiences, of both social, emotional, and intellectual experiences, as well as practical experiences through their internship. So I had students who had a little cubby at the National Press Club, and was writing all the time for a boss that was very remote. At the same time, somebody else is like, giving out water bottles at jazz concerts at the Kennedy Center, and like just getting to, rub shoulders with some, some amazing people. Others, I had some students who felt that their voice should really be heard, when really it was the kind of internship where you're lucky to have a place at the table. What you need to be doing is listening and helping to pitch in and seeing what you can absorb. And then, 5 or 10 years from now, or 20 years from now, maybe you'll be the one sitting at the head of that table, but you're not doing this internship to redesign the website of the entire, Smithsonian Institution or something like that. The other thing that's weird as a semester professor is that you teach a Tuesday, Thursday evening class. You teach the Friday seminar in the city class. So I'm thinking spatially here. And you're also giving them assignments to reflect upon their internship about, I love what Drew, talking about individuals, institutions, systems, right? How do they see that before their very eyes in their internships? So as an instructor, you're wearing sort of 3 hats. Oh, this is my Tuesday, Thursday hat. Well, this is my Friday hat. Okay, well, that paper can be late so that we can do this other one. And then also you're experiencing things with them as a peer, and you're riding the subway together, and you're, talking about, well, that was a weird moment, with everybody. So sometimes, the boundaries are a little bit different than they are on campus. For some students, and I'll be brief here, but for some students, living abroad, I had several international students, they are used to getting on a plane and flying across the world. Others, could barely figure out how to get a bagel and a cup of coffee in them by the time we met, in a high security clearance place at 9 o'clock in the morning. So just stuff like food and being on your own was a big challenge for people. But I think everybody comes away with a lot more sort of kind of intellectual humility, because you're not living on campus and everybody else isn't, 18 to 20 years old. So there's a whole intergenerationality that happens among the professor and the guests and the staff and the internship experience and the riding the subway and walking the streets. That's really valuable. And I think that stays with them a long, long time.
Awesome. Thank you both. So I'm going to turn to a couple of the questions that we've gotten in the chat. The first one I'm going to kind of throw to Adam, and I'm going to try to reframe this a little bit. So Grace asks about many students' sentiment about the idea that online coursework is inherently reduced. So the quality of the learning experience is reduced when you go online, and how students maybe, obviously mid-pandemic when it's been a forced thing, how that maybe isn't the best environment for students. How do we maybe, as online learning becomes more and more the norm, how do we mitigate that preconceived notion that online is in some way inferior to in-person learning?
Yeah, there's a good reason that's a notion. I think we've seen a lot of bad online learning, not at William & Mary, but we have these ideas of very large classes that you're basically a passive recipient of information. You're not engaging. And so it is very possible to have a very stale, passive online experience. And so if we go back to my previous comment about focusing on the experience, there's certain guardrails that we can put up with the Washington Center and with William & Mary more broadly to make sure that we preserve the William & Mary experience. One of which is, making sure that the class community thrives, having a manageable class size where you get to know one another and you feel confident in engaging with one another. And another is making sure that we are making good beyond classroom connections. And I avoid the term real world connections because we never want to give our students the idea that they're not in the real world when they're a student. They are absolutely in the real world. But what we can do is help them connect what they're doing in the classroom beyond the classroom and make those connections in a way that's real. And if that's done digitally with connecting with experts or doing vlogs or online interactions, that still is very, very powerful. But we can keep students engaged and motivated by showing how what they're learning directly applies to their interests and to their success in life. And so that kind of high touch personal approach that William & Mary I think is well known for a good reason, absolutely can extend to the 100% online environment. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Great. And yeah, just to back up that point for the Washington Center in particular, obviously last summer, just like everyone else, we had to move all of our classes online, and that included classes like our DC Summer Institutes that had previously not been online at all. They had been 100% in person, including internships. So our students had to take class online, and then they did virtual internships. Drew obviously taught in that opportunity, and we were nervous as a staff how students would interpret that kind of opportunity and whether they would come out of it feeling the same source of joy and fulfillment that students normally come out of those experiences with. And we like to do a lot of surveying of students and get a lot of student feedback in our office. And we got nothing but absolutely glowing reviews from students who were really happy that they had stuck with the program and still felt like they got a lot of the same benefits of doing the program, even though it was virtual. And on top of that, they felt like they were better able to potentially market themselves in the future to, I know how to work all of these technologies that I otherwise wouldn't have even had the chance to get to know, much less become, semi-experts in. So yeah, that's awesome. So then the next question that I see in the chat is for Drew. So I'll just go ahead and read it. How do we encourage students to do research with the Washington, D.C. community as opposed to on communities? It's a great privilege to enter spaces we might not necessarily be members of. So how do students learn to acknowledge and share the power that they have in those environments?
That sounds like a question from one of my former students, and I can guess who it may have been. And it's such a great question. It's part of the reason that I'm a big believer of inquiry-based teaching and learning, and part of the reason that I've really struggled, to be candid, struggled with what we would sort of say is traditionally service learning. And service learning oftentimes, somewhat accidentally, perpetuates isms, perpetuates biases and stereotypes, because there's a suspicion or there's a cursor understanding or expectation that we as the university, we as the professor or the student have some kind of a knowledge that we bring to the community rather than listening and learning. So that's why I'm a big believer in the way in which we're teaching and learning, is that we are humbly asking questions so that we can listen intently and learn. And then with immense humility, we are crafting responses by using our critical thinking skills. And we're not suggesting solutions to the agency or the organization. We are simply listening and learning. You know, if we were to look into the future on things that we could do even more and to enhance the kind of work that we're doing, you know, we certainly could imagine students living and learning for longer periods of time in Washington, D.C. And if that were the case, you could do so. I think you could do some community-based action research. If we were doing a lot more with, for example, alumni engagement, you can start to have some leadership and community-based, community-driven laboratories that could have some real ownership within and deeply rooted in community and come from individuals and agencies and be community-driven. And that's certainly something to aspire to. But to honor our commitment to student listening, asking questions, and humbly asserting some ideas and conclusions has been our goal. It's a great question.
Yeah, super insightful. Thank you. So those are the questions that I see. There's one more question just about security in DC and how are we handling that, especially I think nowadays. And I think I can go ahead and take that one from the admin side. The great thing about the Washington Center, as we've been pointing out, we've been around for 20 years. We've been running academic programs for majority of those years, and along the way we've learned a lot. Our students have been here through all of the ups and downs that have happened, both in DC and nationwide. And so we are really thoughtful about the protocols that we put together and the ways that we ensure that students are safe. You know, one of the kind of double-edged swords to doing a program like this for students is that they are here when the big things happen. And so as Anne mentioned, you know, she had a class that was here during a government shutdown, and that's obviously happened a few times over the past few years. And so we as a staff take student safety as seriously as any office. And so we work really hard, both with local DC area authorities, so the police, as well as certain hotlines and things like that. We have a counseling center that we're good partners with, and health centers from local universities. And we really marry all of those connections with the folks on campus and protocols from larger William & Mary. And so we have a really extensive protocol that we go through with students. We review it with them when they start their opportunity so that they know in case of emergency or in case of anything from you know, weather emergencies happening to political emergencies happening, they have a way to contact not only our staff, but to know exactly what's going on and where they should be to keep themselves safe. And so they also have all of our contact information. They have all of our cell phones, and so they can get in touch with us any old time, which is super fun. So that we make sure that our students really know that they are taken care of when they're here. And I think that they really appreciate the administrative support that comes along with doing a Washington Center program. So yeah, like I said, that was kind of the last question in the chat. So I'll go ahead and wrap us up. First, thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us tonight. You all are absolutely amazing. Thank you for being so thoughtful and caring and just wonderful partners to us. And as I mentioned at the top, there's no way that we could do what we do, and there's no way we could provide our students with the amazing opportunities that they get in the Washington Center without people like you in our corner. So thank you. For those of you that are at home watching or in the audience watching, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our program tonight. If you'd like to get involved by speaking to a class or hosting a site visit once that's safe again, you can sign up via our volunteer portal, and that web address is just wm.edu/dc/volunteer. So you can sign up there and we'll pull from that, and we put that link in the chat as well. If you'd like to rewatch this event or see our past events or even see what our schedule looks like for the future, as well as our videos that are coming out monthly, you can do that on our 20th anniversary website, and that's wm.edu/dc/20 years. There's plenty of information about everything that we're doing for the 20th, and again, hopefully that'll all culminate in November with an in-person event at the DC Center, just celebrating our 20th. But until then, please let us know if you have any ideas, thoughts, things that you'd like to see at the 20th anniversary. If you have questions or you want to be connected with any of our wonderful speakers, please reach out. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our program, and I hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you. Good night.